Operation Domination is underway. The ultimate game plan to dominate your NFL experience. With your hosts, Dan
you gotta be confident about your Achilles when you
Chase
show up.
Thornton,
Yeah, I mean, I got him at
and Adam LaRue. Don't hope to be great and dominate.
All right. Welcome back into another edition of Operation Domination. Don't hope to win. Be great and dominate. As always, I'm your host, Dan Mater, joined here with Chase Thornton and Adam LaRue in the building. Or Chase, should I be calling you Founding Father George Washington over here?
Yeah, well, hey, we're celebrating Independence Day and freedom this week and American history and everything else. So, getting in the spirit and letting everybody see it.
Yeah, for those of you on the radio or podcast side, I mean, he's got the full deck out, man. He's got the wig out, he's got the blue coat. Like, I'm just waiting for you to hold a flag on a boat going across the Delaware River. That's the only thing that's missing right now.
Yeah, well, yeah, the boat's in the shop. So
okay,
we'll leave that, but yeah.
A couple
Looking good
in there. Yeah, just a few.
Like Sanders said, like Deion Sanders says, look good, feel good, play good. So
Adam, how we doing this week, man?
Doing great. Happy with the short week, but happy to have a chance to talk some football this summer. So and happy to actually see some, at least for this time of year, some interesting moves.
Oh yeah, I mean we're gonna be getting into all of that right here on Operation Domination. Make sure you subscribe on our YouTube channel at Fantasy Football Advice Network at FF Advice Net, and make sure you download us on your favorite podcast app wherever you listen to podcasts. But yeah, we got crazily, we got a couple trades, right? I mean, let's get the one out of the way that's not fantasy relevant. Mika Fitzpatrick, Jalen Ramsey, swap teams. And I have a lot of thoughts about that, but that's not fantasy relevant. So we're not going to dive into that into the show. What was fantasy relevant, though, was that part two, or the second trade, or however they want to classify that, was the Dolphins trading Johnu Smith to the Pittsburgh Steelers, something we had heard about months ago, but then seemed like it had been squashed out. Didn't think it was actually going to happen. That takes place. Then literally, like hours later, the Dolphins make a move where they're going to bring Darren Waller out of retirement, trade a 2026 conditional 6th-round pick to get back a 7th-round pick and Waller's rights, who then signs a 1-year, $5 million contract deal. So let's deal with the part that I think is going to be easiest to deal with, and that's Darren Waller coming out of retirement. I mean, Adam, do you look at Darren Waller? He goes to the Dolphins. Yes, they vacated Johnu Smith, but do you see any value here going into 2025?
It's interesting. I think it's like maybe an interesting swing, maybe an interesting stash, but not like, I don't project him as a top 12 tight end by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, candidly, it was a surprise when Johnu Smith did it, because we hadn't really seen with Mike McDaniel the tight end position do all that much that was particularly interesting. So I would believe that Johnu Smith is the exception. He is now gone, and that Darren Waller will at best continue to be a middling tight end, which is what has largely been played for the Dolphins with Mike McDaniel.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, though, before Johnu Smith last season, he had 20% target share. I'm going to talk more about this a little bit later, but under Mike McDaniel, their tight ends never got more than 10% of the targets. Like, they were not involved in the offense. I think it's interesting they bring Darren Waller in, but I want to get Chase's opinions here before I dive in.
Yeah, it doesn't really move the needle for me, just because, I mean, if we think about it, Waller, he had a couple of very good years, tight end years. He had some fun years, 2019, 2020, 2021, even if you want to think about it, even though he missed a bunch of games that season. He was pretty damn good. Okay. 2029 touchdowns even. But if you look, that year was the exception, the major exception to the rule with Darren Waller. He didn't show in the last 3-4 years of his career that he could stay healthy at all. And he retired for a reason, he's basically, in my house, he's Kelsey Plum's ex-husband by now, because I'm not really all that worried about what Darren Waller, the pro football player, is going to be doing. He's, 1, 2, 3 touchdowns a year in his career outside of that. And that's if he can work his way up to football shape. That's if, like we said, he can earn any targets in this system. He's basically a replacement level player for most of his career outside of the 2 anomalous years that I talked about in Las Vegas, which were 5 and 6 years ago by now. So no, I'm not worried about Darren Waller. I will not be, taking swings on him. I mean, if you want to take a real long shot in a best ball league with your last round pick or 2 on him, be my guest. But no, I don't think that does a whole lot. It's interesting. It's an interesting move because it was somebody we thought was all moved on already and done. But it doesn't hold a whole lot for me.
I mean, it's just interesting from NFL headlines for July before we get the training camp. I mean, this is why it's news, right? It's been a year and a half since we've seen Darren Waller. That's how far along he's been removed from football activities. 2023 was the last time we saw him. He was a tight end 14 on a points per game basis. The Chase's point, he had 1 touchdown, that season. I think this was just a move of like, hey, you know what? We'll take a shot on a guy who was an athletic pass catching tight end because the other guys they have on the roster, you're looking at Pharaoh Brown. They drafted Jalen Conyers. Everybody's a block first tight end on that team. I don't even know what Darren Waller has left. But to your point, I don't see this as Waller can move into any type of potential Johnu Smith role. Speaking of Johnu Smith, who went to the Pittsburgh Steelers, let's stay on the Dolphins side of this, though, to kick things off. I mentioned he had a 20% target share last year, and it really hurt Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, right? Like, yes, there was other factors here. Like Tua was injured. Even when he was back, they were having him get the ball out of his hands so fast because they didn't trust the offensive line, and they couldn't bear to be without Tua potentially. So they're just getting the 2.42 seconds. Like, that's the fastest time to throw in the NFL. For just to give you an idea, the guy who's second, Cooper Rush, 2.55. Like, that's how far the gap was from the second guy throwing the ball out of his hands. And then when you add in the comments of the Dolphins coaching staff talking about, well, the focus is getting the ball out to his hands even faster. I don't know if that's even possible, but it gives you an idea that they're sticking to the game plan at the very least that they had last season. So I don't know if Hill and Waddle have a chance to become more efficient like they were a couple of years ago, getting the deeper bombs. We'll see what comes out. But what it does do, at least in my opinion, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, what it does do is I think it gives them more of a floor that you can at least sink your teeth into. Remember, I said 10% target shares all the tight ends got before Johnu Smith because they funneled it to the wide receivers. Tyreek Hill was a 32% target share player. Jalen Waddle was a 23% target share player. That went down to 22% for Tyreek Hill, 17% for Jalen Waddle, and that's why he got left with a big old mess. Now it's happened, and people have already kind of started to catch up to this. We see it in the ADP, early on ADP ranks. Hill is up 11 spots in his overall rankings. Now he's at 32 overall, wide receiver 16, and Waddle's up 17 spots, wide receiver 31, 65th overall. So and that's from like early June until now, beginning of July. So public are already kind of seeing it, I think, that way. What do you guys think? We'll start with Chase.
Yeah, I mean, for the Dolphins, there was a lot going on there last year. I mean, you had, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later with one of my players that we talk about later, but I mean, there were a lot of targets that were going short and quick and underneath, which meant that Johnu Smith could thrive there in a way that, as we mentioned, no tight end has really been able to do there in Miami, especially under Mike McDaniel. But I do think that if for my money, I think they're going to continue to try to get the ball out of Tua's hands quick. So I'm looking more at, again, the tight end they bring in. I'm looking more at the running back situation. Their running backs had over 130 targets last season combined. I mean, they were throwing the ball not just to Johnu Smith. They were throwing short all over the place, including the running backs. And let's not forget, I mean, they lost Raheem Mostert, but they've got Jalen Wright. They've got Devin Achane, who might be 2 of the 3 or 4 fastest running backs in the whole league right now. That could be a big part of things for them. And I'm not necessarily sure about Tyreek Hill gaining as many of those targets as possibly Jalen Waddle. So it probably moves the needle more for me for Waddle than it does for Tyreek Hill.
Well, and it almost makes you wonder too. I mean, Davante Adams had 87 targets last year. Is he going to be like the first guy since McCaffrey to break 100 targets as a running back? Like, I don't know. That may even blow on the table. Adam, what's your take on this?
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, it's about Johnu Smith leaving, what it does for Tyreek Hill's floor, what it does for Waddle's floor, maybe even Davante Adams to some degree.
Yeah, I mean, Johnu Smith, I kind of what you brought up earlier. He was getting a ton of targets and a ton of the underneath targets with the quick passing game. As you know, when Tua came back when he was hurt, they were just throwing like completely underneath. Had to get the ball out of his hands as quick as humanly possible. I think alleviating that. I mean, hopefully they go deep a little bit more, but not having one less mouth to feed as far as the underneath targets should allow. I mean, especially some of these quick guys, right? Like hopefully Waddle, hopefully Tyreek. Like these are guys who have been successful underneath with screens. I mean, Waddle, especially his rookie season, was largely underneath stuff. He didn't really start to get going down the field until year 2. So that's a player who has seen a ton of success as just quick screen slot guy. And you know, Tyreek early in his career, very similar. Now the flashy plays have been the deep threats, but these are both guys who can do a lot of damage underneath. So hopefully, Achane as well. You mentioned him. He's been like their current guy, kind of in that vein, the quick yak guy. Hopefully, I think that would be a better version of this offense, a more watchable version of this offense, because as much as Johnu Smith, from a fantasy perspective, was a revelation, especially down the stretch last season, Miami's offense for the first time under Mike McDaniel was awful to watch, like almost the entirety of last season.
Yeah, and that's the question still at the end of the day. What's going to happen, right? Because the offensive line on paper doesn't look to be much better. You're still terrified to be without Tua Tagovailoa because they don't have a great backup behind that. And we got to see if Mike McDaniel can even get back to it. I mean, the other part of this too, you kind of mentioned it, made me think about this, like the way they utilize Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Like Waddle got permanently put out in the perimeter. Like, I don't know why, but he doesn't. Look at the Rams, who I'm going to talk about later. Like, they interchange Puka and Cooper Kupp. McDaniel did not do that with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, even though he absolutely could have, absolutely should have. And we'll see if those are corrections they make this year. That has to be all speculation, but that's really what this issue boils down to. But I will say this, I feel a little bit better, let's say, about taking a shot on Tyreek Hill at a wide receiver 2 or Jalen Waddle at a wide receiver 3, knowing that those extra targets at least should be there. If the volume's there, then we know it could possibly pop, but it makes you feel a little bit better about where they're going now than I think what was going on a few weeks ago when it was just like, look, we don't know because Johnu is a monster again. You know, Tyreek Hill's getting older. We don't even know what these guys' ceilings are. Let's flip this over now. I'll talk about Johnu Smith and the Pittsburgh Steelers side of things. And it's going to get real exciting. I know this. I mean, Chase loves Arthur Smith, so I feel like we should let Chase go first on this one.
Yeah, right. FAS. Forget Arthur Smith, right?
That's what that stands for?
Yeah, sure.
Well, we can say on radio at least.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's what we can talk about right now. But Arthur Smith, I mean, we all know he loves tight ends supposedly, but the problem is he loves them so much that he wants about 5 or 6 of them on the field at any given time, and it's your guess is as good as mine from week to week, drive to drive. Who the hell is going to get the targets, right? So now Johnu Smith goes there, and we assume that he might be able to, do some nice things there, except that they still have Pat Freiermuth. Heck, Darnell Washington, all 6'8" of him, could still emerge as a favorite of, Arthur Smith. Who the hell knows? But then on top of that, the quarterback situation there right now is Aaron Rodgers. And I'm sorry, but I don't think Aaron Rodgers has necessarily been a tight end kingmaker in his career. He just really hasn't. I'm not all that interested right now in taking any part of this. Huh?
What happened to your boy Robert Tonyan?
Yeah. Bob Tonyan scored about 800 touchdowns one year and then did nothing else.
What happened to your generational talent, Jermichael Finley?
He got hurt.
Okay.
Aaron Rodgers didn't make Jermichael Finley. Jermichael Finley made Jermichael Finley. Okay, no. But he hasn't been, we haven't seen like a steady flow of super tight ends coming from Aaron Rodgers passing games. Okay. We've seen some usable seasons, but I don't think that it's going to be enough to elevate any of these guys into a position where I want any of them on my team, even in best ball. There's too many what ifs with that tight end room. There's too many what ifs with Rodgers and how the passing game is going to shake out. And it's still Arthur Smith. I want no part of it. So yeah, you can count me out on anything Johnu Smith wise or Pittsburgh tight end wise in general.
Well, Adam, let me ask you from this perspective. I mean, what does this tell you about the offense going into this year? They got Aaron Rodgers assigned, but now they bring in Johnu Smith. They already have Pat Freiermuth. They already have Darnell Washington. What does this tell you about the offense?
Yeah, they add a wide receiver, they add a quarterback, and they add a tight end. And what it tells me is they're going to be heavy in tight end sets. They're going to run the heck out of the ball. We did this whole thing with Aaron Rodgers. Maybe that's why Pittsburgh was willing to play chicken the whole time, because they're like, all right, well, whoever's the quarterback's throwing 15 times a game, so we don't really care.
Turn around, hand that dude off. Yep.
We're getting 3 tight ends. I mean, we're looking at the Colts tight end. We finally have a starting tight end that is going to start for the majority of the snaps. Fingers crossed, at the very least. And we're passing that baton onto the Pittsburgh Steelers of tight end by committee. There will be 3 tight ends with between 150 and 400 yards, and nothing above that.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. I mean, Pat Freiermuth, even without Johnu in the building, was only tight end 13, right? He still wasn't even a top 12 tight end, and he had 17% target share. Johnu Smith has never had more than a 16% target share with Arthur Smith, even when he was freaking starter. Like, the only time he was even fantasy relevant was 2020 when he had 8 touchdowns. That's what made him fantasy relevant. It wasn't the volume. It wasn't how he was utilized. He just happened to score quite a bit that year. Good luck picking which games you had the touchdowns in, because that's what it boiled down to. And that's when, there wasn't guys like Freiermuth and Darnell Washington who's going to play a lot, especially in goal lines. I mean, look, at the end of the day, this is going to be the team that leads with the most tight ends on the field the majority of the time by the NFL, right? So just quickly though, but that brings us to DK Metcalf, like the one receiving asset that maybe can still be fantasy relevant. But now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, you're going to have to be efficient and red zone dependent. Now it's possible with Aaron Rodgers, right? Like if he gives him the Davante Adams treatment, like he targeted Davante Adams consistently in the red, I mean, everywhere, of course, but like really locked in on him, even with the Jets last season in the red zone. That's one of the reasons Adams was still like, a top 12 wide receiver, even as bad as that offense looked, even as bad as Aaron Rodgers looked. But Metcalf is not going to be the type of guy, at least I don't think he is, unless it's just, Rodgers decides he has to focus in on him, but he's never been the type of guy to get you like 5 to 8 targets every single game. This is, or I should say 6 to 8 targets every single game. He's a guy who gets like 3 to 5, big play. Maybe he scores on that. What's the evolution there, Adam? Do you think that Metcalf, because it's Rodgers, because he's the focus guy and they're just bringing in more tight ends, he might be the only receiver out there on the field. Do you think he gets more focal attention and that those numbers we see go up, even if it's a low passing offense?
I can see Metcalf, especially given how much, I think, relative to his talent, he's underperformed as a fantasy asset. I could see, I think he's a better football player than he has been for fantasy for pretty much since his, second year in the league?
Yeah.
So I do think that there's a reasonable opportunity for DK Metcalf specifically to, just the talent shine through and on low volume, being the type of player that he is that can kind of make big plays from anywhere with any volume, for him to still outperform what he's been in fantasy. For the rest of them, good luck.
Chase, what does it do for the running game? Like Caleb Johnson, are you just like, look, I know you're going to pound the ball so much, Jalen Warren, which don't give too much away because I do want to talk about Jalen Warren later, but what does it make for the running game in your mind?
I mean, there's the threat of the pass in theory right now. I mean, it's still an Arthur Smith offense. It's an aging Aaron Rodgers. We just talked about every guy that's probably going to catch a pass for them this season. I'm not overly ambitious about or overly optimistic about Roman Wilson and Calvin Austin or Robert Woods. But I mean, that run game, it's definitely intriguing from the standpoint that, Pittsburgh, like we just said, all the signals look like they want to run. However, everybody that's all psyched up about Caleb Johnson going to be maybe the new number 1 there, or the 1A to Jalen Warren's 1B like Najee was. It's still Arthur Smith. And remember what Arthur Smith was able to do in Atlanta with anybody who was a useful running back. So, in terms of investing in this running game, I would take some few late flyers in it. And I think it bodes well for the running game overall, being an Arthur Smith offense, having 39 tight ends on the field, having Caleb Johnson and Jalen Warren. But for a fantasy standpoint, this is not necessarily a situation that I want to have too much exposure to.
Yeah. It's going to be a lower scoring offense. That much we know. Okay, so now it's time to get into our theme of the day is independence. We're free. And now we want to know what players we're free from. And I have to give our founding father the lead here. Go ahead, Mr. George Washington.
All right. Yeah. In the interest of, our Independence Day coming up this weekend, 4th of July, today we're doing a couple of things. First off, we are going to declare our independence here on Operation Domination. We are going to declare our independence from fantasy players who we might be frustrated with. We might feel they're washed. Whatever the reason, we're done with them. We're kicking them to the curb and we are declaring our independence from them. So in the interest of that, we're going to start off, Dan, with you. And why don't you give us the player that you are declaring your independence from here in 2025? Go for it.
Well, I'm glad we're just talking about the Steelers because it is Steelers running back and it is Jalen Warren. I am done listening and trying to fight people on this constantly. Like there's still people who are trying to hit the drums that you should be taking a shot on Jalen Warren. That it's Jalen Warren's year to finally be that breakout player. We've been hearing this for 2 seasons, ever since his rookie year, because, he's super efficient and he's got a shot and he could be the next Austin Eckler. Look, right now, it's not like he's going crazy high, but he's going as running back 33 and 90th overall. That is down 17 spots to where this thing started out in June. However, over the last 3 years, he's been the RB 67. He's been the RB 33. He's been the RB 46. So by that logic, you're still drafting him at his ceiling point that he's shown you so far in his career at running back 33 with his ADP. He's never topped 50% snaps. He's never had a larger carry share than 32%. His call to fame was the 15% target share that he had in 2022. Maybe he can get back to that point because, again, we kind of just laid out like they don't have a lot of passing weapons to go to. Maybe they'll take it dunked down to him. There's still Cordell Patterson there. I don't know how much he factors in. Arthur Smith still likes to go to him quite a little bit. But the efficiency is not going to carry him to take over. How many times do we hear people talk about Jalen Warren was going to overtake Najee Harris because he's just a more efficient player? No. Especially now with Arthur Smith. They drafted Caleb Johnson. He's a carbon copy prototype of what Najee Harris was. What happened? Early downs, goal line, anytime they even had a lead, hell, anytime they were within one score. It was run with the power game running back. It's not going to be any different in Caleb, in my opinion. Caleb, by the way, is running back 30. I think that's a little too low because even Najee Harris, while it wasn't fun to watch, was still consistently finished as a top 24 running back. Meanwhile, you're sitting there, and unless you're in full-point PPR leagues, and remember we do our rankings on half-point PPR leagues, Warren's barely cracking a low-end RB3. Barely cracking the idea of even being a flex option. Probably rather go wide receiver in that case. So I am breaking free from the idea that you need to waste your time on Jalen Warren.
No, you know what? To be honest with you, I felt that way for several years too. It's the Roshan Johnson syndrome. It's the Kendre Miller syndrome where they're supposed to be more than they are. The difference is that Jalen Warren has actually produced at least a little bit as opposed to those other two dudes. But he's one of those perennial players that we're waiting for to break out, waiting for to be some kind of superstar because we all, kind of like Adam said earlier with DK Metcalf, I think Jalen Warren is a better football player than he necessarily is fantasy player. And I think that we all see his skill set and want more out of it. And it's just not the way that the Steelers are going to use him. So Adam, you have a rebuttal to that or are you in agreement here with being independent from Jalen Warren this season?
No rebuttal at all. I'm with you. I think he serves as no more than a little off-season trade piece if you need to in Dynasty, but he's not someone I plan on heading into the season with at all. So I'm with you.
Excellent. Just like the 13 colonies, we are united in our feeling on Jalen Warren then. So now, Adam, let's go to you and let's find out a player that you are declaring your independence from here in 2025.
So this is not someone who I've had a ton in the last couple of years, although I've been forced into some spots and at least been willing to accept that there's some kind of value. And this is someone who I'm just going out on a limb and saying no more, regardless of what happens. He can have a nice little start in his next gig. Doesn't matter. Russell Wilson can throw 4 touchdowns week 1, and he's not sniffing a redraft roster in any capacity. He had the 2-3 touchdown games, I believe, in the first month of the Steelers gig that people got excited about, and he started to sniff some rosters. Thankfully, I didn't have him there. I did have him in a Superflex Dynasty, but that wasn't the end of the world, even when it got to the end of the season. But he, when it matters, will show that he's a pumpkin. I don't think that he starts the full season. I think that I can finally say that he probably will have a game or two stretch where people get excited. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to take him seriously at all. I refuse to. I'm done doing it. He's tricked people for a couple week stretches, a couple years in a row now, and it's dumb, and there's no point in doing it any longer.
Yeah, it pains me to agree with you there as a Badger legend that Russell Wilson is. I mean, really, he hasn't been overly fantasy relevant on a redraft basis since even a couple years before he left Seattle, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm agreeing with that. Dan, you got any thoughts on Russell Wilson up there in New York, one of the key cities in our fight for independence there?
But he has the moon ball. If I hear he has a moon ball one more time out of somebody, I'm going to throw up in my mouth. No, I got nothing. The only silver lining I will say is that Russell Wilson's not being drafted in 12-man leagues for sure, but Adam's absolutely correct in the sense of whenever he has a good game, and he's done this for the last couple of years, people start picking him up off the waiver wire, getting all excited that maybe Russell Wilson can somehow spark something at some point. No, absolutely not. Adam was completely right. We're going to see multiple quarterbacks. If I could bet on that, I would anywhere. You're going to see multiple quarterbacks start for the New York Giants. So no, it's absolutely not.
All right. Yep. Okay. Well, once again, I think we are all united in our feelings on that. So we're going to move to my guy. And my guy, I don't know, we might have a difference of opinion on this. We kind of talked about his situation a little bit earlier, though. My player from whom I'm declaring my independence this year of our Lord 2025 is Tyreek Hill of the Miami Dolphins. I am ready to move on. Now, you talk about Tyreek Hill last year, the wide receiver 1 overall in ADP, the number 2 player overall in ADP last year. He was my first round pick in my home league, which may, I will admit, may tie into my frustration here and my take on things. But it made sense last year. It made sense to take him like that. 2023, he had career high in receptions, career high in targets, career high in yards, career high in fantasy points. He led all wide receivers in touchdowns, looked great. Same offense. We all thought, hey, wheels up, let's go. And ouch. Okay. He ended up the year wide receiver 21 overall in half points, scoring. But the 10.5 points per game that he scored was tied for wide receiver 33. He tied with the aforementioned DK Metcalf. And he also tied with Josh Downs. All right. Jacoby Myers actually was basically the equivalent production that you got from Tyreek Hill over the course of the year, actually outscored him in points per game. And Jacoby Myers was drafted as the number 54 wide receiver overall at 145. You could have had him at the 12-13 turn in a 12-round league and gotten the same production you got out of, on average, drafting Tyreek Hill second overall. Josh Downs, I mentioned, he was a wide receiver 67, 182nd overall, and tied for him in points per game. Now, Josh only played 11 games, but still, we didn't get a full season's worth of production out of Tyreek Hill. Now, yeah, some of that was due to the 2 injuries. Some of it's due to Tyler Huntley, having to play some quarterback back there. Some of it was the rise of Johnu Smith, which is all kind of tied together. We talked about Davante Adams having 87 targets there. Yeah, but Tyreek, he's coming off career lows right now in fantasy points, in touchdowns, and it was the second worst yards per target of his career. You were definitely disappointed with where he took him last year. But when I pair that all together, even if Tua stays healthy all season this season, which is, never a given, he might not be healthy for the rest of this week. Tyreek Hill's a head case, dude. He's had legal troubles. He's got 8 babies with 5 different mamas that we know of. He had this domestic incident with his wife back in April that he eventually was not prosecuted for, but we've seen him, beating up dudes on boat docks and everything else. We heard his postseason comments immediately after the season that he wasn't sure if he wanted to even be in Miami, and they had to have a private meeting with him and tell him that was unacceptable. He's going as wide receiver 15 right now. He's going 25th overall. Honestly, I think he bounces back from last season a bit. I think he sees maybe some of those targets that were going to Johnu Smith, not all of them. And you can keep him. You can keep him at that price. He's a headache waiting to happen. And if he is that closely tied, if last year was solely about Tua Tagovailoa and having to throw the ball short and quick because they were worried about Tua's health and worried about their backup quarterback, if he's that tied to Tua, I don't think I want any part of that, especially where he's going right now. You can keep Tyreek Hill. I'm declaring my independence.
Well, I mean, that whole offense is super tied to Tua, right? That's the scary part of the offense. Like you said, we talked about it a little bit earlier about, maybe they have more of a floor now with the funneling of the targets heading their way with no Johnu Smith. But to your point, yes, when you're that tied to Tua, behind that bad of an offensive line with a coach that we think is a good offensive head coach, but after what we saw last year, we have to begin the question, like, well, how does he handle those factors that we just labeled out? And the example we got last year was not fitting. And the other thing with Tyreek Hill is, it was a wrist injury. It wasn't a leg injury. And yet he just seemed much slower. And that could just be age kicking in. So he's also kind of the age cliff too. I laid it out before. He's wide receiver 16. Do I think he has a better shot of being around that range now with the Johnu Smith move? Sure. Do I think you're drafting him with the idea that you have a top 12 ceiling on your hands? I would say the probability is pretty low on that one, with just as equal to or greater probability of it falling off a cliff if we have to go back to the backup quarterbacks again in the Miami Dolphins. So I'm with you. I don't disagree. Tyreek Hill's not somebody I'm going to look to target in that range. We'll look for guys with more upside.
Adam, are you any more excited about the idea of Tyreek Hill at around that ADP in best ball versus redraft, or are you in on him totally? Are you out on him totally? What's your thoughts here on the cheetah?
Best ball, I think I'd be a little bit more interested, but I think either way, like redraft, I think he's slightly overvalued. I'm not out on him, but I think he'd need to fall a little bit for me to get him. You get close to the wide receiver 2 to wide receiver 3 like threshold, then I think pretty interested. But as like a mid-tier wide receiver 2, I'm a little bit less so. You get towards the back end of that tier, and I could see myself having Tyreek Hill on a roster, is I guess what I'm saying. So I'm not declaring independence, but I also do think he's a little overvalued, and I think that there's a lot more risk than a reward when it comes to him right now.
Yeah, and just to further my point before we move on here, I mean, last season, even for those fantasy points that he did score, he really only had about 4 or 5, maybe you could argue, games that were actually fantasy useful. The rest of the time, again, he was a replacement level player, scoring 8, 9.5 PPR points a week. Just, I'm ready to move on from that. Plus, I can feel better about myself not drafting him as an upstanding quote unquote citizen. So, all right. And with that, we're going to move on then from our talk about independence. Now we're going to celebrate our freedom. We're all excited in this country that we have our freedoms, and we're all thankful for that, and thank the troops and everything else that we always go over every 4th of July and every other, patriotic holiday. And that's good, great, grand, and wonderful. And we certainly feel that here. But today we're not necessarily celebrating that freedom. We're going to be celebrating the freedom of players that we are excited and happy to see free of the bonds that have previously held them back, fantasy wise and in their careers. This could be due to a new coaching situation. It could be due to a new team, whatever, but we are celebrating these players' freedom. And last time we started with you, Dan. Adam, let's go to you this time. Whose freedom are you rejoicing in this season?
Yeah, I am rejoicing in the freedom of Bijan Robinson, who, I mean, look, he had a great season last season. It's not like, he's coming off some downer season, right? But he is free from the shackles of awful quarterback play. And that is something that you are very excited about when it comes to a running back, right? I've talked about it the entirety of the time that I've been on this show the last couple of years. You don't like to see good running backs with bad quarterbacks because it's just an uphill battle. We saw the difference this past season, right? With Saquon Barkley, his last season with the Giants, which was not that fun, to a blast that we had with the Eagles. Derrick Henry, that last season on the Titans versus this past season when you get to throw him in with the Lamar Jackson Ravens. Like, the difference between a good offense and a bad offense for a running back is colossal. Bijan Robinson could have an incredible season if Penix is even able to play at an above average level, because pretty clearly, we've gotten into the intricacies of this before, but it's pretty clear that how they ran the entirety of their offense was limited by Kirk Cousins' ability to throw the ball downfield, Kirk Cousins' ability to move throughout the pocket, Kirk Cousins' ability to get to his spot, even just handing the ball off on outside zone. Like, there were so many limitations that are now being completely eliminated from this offense for a player who is already doing really well to now be just completely unleashed from the shackles of a bad quarterback and the shackles of what was, I think, at best a mediocre offense, and only a mediocre offense because of what Bijan was bringing to the table. To actually, still the best player, but, there's other guys kind of carrying some of the load. I am really, really excited to see not just, 1,500 yards, 14 touchdowns is going to be tough to beat, but the efficiency could be a whole lot better this season.
No, I can concur with that. I'm excited to see Bijan Robinson outside of the bonds of not just bad quarterback play, but now outside of the double bonds of Arthur Smith and bad quarterback play. I mean, we get the double whammy for him. He's going to be frolicking and skipping all over the field there. Dan, what's your thoughts there on Bijan Robinson there?
Oh, I love it. And Adam's being real clear about it, right? He's not predicting a breakout year, but we could be seeing a super year out of Bijan, a McCaffrey-like year. Maybe not quite Saquon, but like a Saquon level quite year. Like, this is why Bijan Robinson is my RB1. Everything Adam just laid out. The last 3 games where Michael Penix started, and remember, Michael Penix number-wise wasn't even that great. It was just the fact that he could come in and run the full-fledged offense and actually make defenses have to respect him going deep. Bijan Robinson, 5.3 yards per carry. He had 2 touchdowns every single game. Now, I'm not saying he's going to get average 2 touchdowns a game, Michael Penix, next season. That would be unbelievable. But the point is that it was 2 things, Adam. It wasn't just that Michael Penix took over. It was Michael Penix took over, and the Falcons had already finally made a decision that they weren't going to feed Tyler Algier in a significant way other than spelling Bijan. They went all in on Bijan at that point. So now you start off the season at that point with the second year under that offense, which, I mean, we still have to see is Zach Robinson truly creative, but we know the scheme he runs, generally speaking, produces fantasy guys, especially running backs when they tie their knots to him. Like, look at Kyron Williams, right? And you get Michael Penix in there who can make the defenses have to spread out, and he's not facing those boxes. Yeah, it's there. He had 72 targets last year, too. I mean, we're talking about a full workhorse guy. He's going to get targeted more than Saquon Barkley. Like, Barkley had, 40 targets last season? Jalen Hurts doesn't check the ball down. So the only guy who has the chance to perform on Bijan's level is Christian McCaffrey, who we don't know if he can stay healthy anymore. Right? Like, he's the only guy who can kind of rival that level of rushing attempts, met with targets, met with touchdown ability, met with efficiency. I'm totally with you.
All right. Give me Bijan or give me death, right? All right. Dan, who's your player that you're celebrating this dude's freedom from whatever bonds were holding him back here in fantasy land?
Well, speaking of the Rams, and I don't know how much this player's been held back fantasy-wise, but I am excited for one thing. Davante Adams finally gets away from porous offenses ever since Green Bay, right? Look at, we had suffer on the Raiders, suffer on the Jets, still produced, by the way, but just to give you an idea of what the uphill battle was he was dealing with since he left the Packers in his prime years with the Packers. He had a catch rate of 70%. That got knocked down to 58% on average since 2022 when he joined the Raiders. His 8.2 ADOT was the lowest of his career last season. His quarterback rate when targeted, his years with the Packers, a 117.5. The last 2 years, it's been 89. He's had to deal with being on the 23rd to the 24th ranked offenses the past couple of seasons. Through all of that, he finishes the wide receiver 10 in points per game. Now let's put Davante, and even at plus 30 age, right? Now let's put Davante on a team with Sean McVay, with a quarterback who, in Matthew Stafford, who still throws like he's in his prime, on a team that knows how to funnel targets to their wide receivers. Like I think I might have mentioned earlier, but just to reiterate, Nakua and Cooper Kupp, Nakua had a 30% target share, Cooper Kupp at 24%. I know Adams had a plus 30% target share last season, but give him 24, 25% on a much more efficient offense. This could be off the chain. And don't forget, they don't throw the ball to the tight ends. They don't throw the ball to the running backs. Kyron Williams at 8% target share. Tight ends at 9%. Like, everything's getting funneled to those wide receivers. And I don't see this being any different. I know they drafted Ferguson He's a pass catching tight end they drafted in the second round. Definitely a candidate to me that even if he does become something, he's not a rookie tight end I'm looking at to pop off in the first year, right? And tight ends are still, I know Laporta, I know Brock Bowers, but tight ends still usually take a couple of years to go here. So everything to me says Davante Adams, who right now is at wide receiver 19, while Nakua is in the top 10, and people are already saying to me, well, it's going to be really difficult for the offense to generate a top 5 type wide receiver in Nakua and a top 20 wide receiver in Davante Adams. Generally speaking, it is difficult to get 2 wide receivers on the same team in those categories. Don't forget, the Rams are a team that got 2 guys in the top 10. Davante Adams, he did look like he lost a little bit of a step to me, but because he's interchangeable with Nakua, and we kind of got to see it with the Jets because he's actually allowed to run like quite a bit of slot in this offense, I don't think top 12 is out of the question. So I think when you're drafting at wide receiver 19, I'm not saying draft him at wide receiver 12, but when you're drafting at wide receiver 19, I think you're drafting in a position where he still has ceiling possibility from that point for you. And it might not mean because Nakua got hurt or Nakua didn't have as good of a season.
Nope, I agree with you. He's set free. I mean, if you want to look at last season too, I mean, once he got kind of his feet underneath him in New York, and you look at what he did fantasy playoff wise, he was playing with Aaron Rodgers, who was the best quarterback he'd been able to play with since Aaron Rodgers. I mean, week 14, 21.4 half PPR points. Week 15, 38.3 half PPR points. Week 16, 16.3. He had a nice little run in the playoffs. Now, he disappeared week 17, but if you had Davante Adams on your team, you probably at least made it to week 17, and at that point, all bets are off. So no, I definitely agree with you there. I think that he can be unleashed by having just a competent offense around him and a quarterback in Matthew Stafford who knows how to find the open receiver. Adam, you excited for Davante Adams this year, or are you going to pull the reins on that?
Yeah, no, I'm excited for him. I mean, look, you hate to ever like place someone as just like a 1-for-1 replacement, but genuinely Davante Adams for Cooper Kupp is as close of that as you will ever get. Because in terms of skill set, like at this point of Davante Adams' career, I think earlier in his career was a little bit better going down the field than Cooper Kupp was. But at this point in their career, I think that what Cooper Kupp was doing early in the season is very much so what Davante Adams is at this stage of his career. So I'm really excited to see what he can do with this offense. I think Davante Adams and Matthew Stafford like 10 years ago would have been like a forbidden combination of players, but I'm excited to see them together.
Excellent. All right, well, we may be drinking Samuel Adams today in honor of Independence Day, but we're all in on Davante Adams there. Now let's move to mine then. My player whom I'm celebrating for his freedom. I'm so excited to actually see this guy again finally, and it sounds weird, it feels weird to me to say this being where he's been in his career, but my player I'm excited to see set free this season is Justin Fields, the quarterback from the New York Jets there. I mean, listen, we know that every single time the dude has been a starting quarterback and an unquestioned starting quarterback, he is an unquestioned starting fantasy quarterback. All right. 2022 finishes QB 6, 2023 QB 13 in points per game. Okay. So we know that he's got that ability there. Last season, if you look at his overall season stats, you probably see that he scored about 119 fantasy points last season and played in 10 games. And so you're thinking 11.9 points a game. That's not all that great. No. You only need to count the 6 games he actually played as a starter. Take the points he scored in those 6 games in Pittsburgh. When he was the starter and Wilson was out, he scored 18.9 points per game on a fantasy basis. That would have ranked as quarterback 10. So again, even in new system, new team with guys he wasn't familiar with, and as not the unquestioned starter, it was Russell Wilson's team, remember, he still scored as a top 10 option when he was a starter. This year now he's out of Chicago, hallelujah, as a Packer fan. He's out of Pittsburgh, so he's free of the Arthur Smith ridiculousness that we've touched on seemingly interminably on this show. He's the unquestioned starter. He's got a good longtime vet in the room with him in Tyrod Taylor, who I think, he can actually still learn some things from. He's not necessarily a rookie anymore. He's a veteran. And by this point is Justin Fields, but I still think there are things he can learn from Tyrod Taylor there, who seems like a quintessential guy as a backup quarterback, a guy that I would want in my room as a backup. There's no more Nathaniel Hackett now with the New York Jets. They have Tanner Engstrand there. They have a new head coach, and Tanner Engstrand there was the Lions pass game coordinator underneath Ben Johnson. So I think that we could even see some passing upside from Justin Fields. We always think of him in that running outside, and that's why we love him in fantasy. But we might be able to see some things actually happen for him in that pass game here with Tanner Engstrand as their offensive coordinator. He's got some nice weapons around him between Breece Hall, Braylon Allen in the backfield to take some of the pressure off of him, with Garrett Wilson and Josh Reynolds on the outside and Mason Taylor, whom they just drafted this season. I like that. He's going as QB 14 right now. I think people are starting to get excited about the idea that Justin Fields as a starting quarterback and as an unquestioned starter can be useful to my fantasy team. But even at quarterback 14, he could be a steal, and he is an absolute top tier super flex option as your number 2 guy if you can swing that. So I am just all excited to see Justin Fields taking care of business up there in New York. Dan, you got any question or any comments on that for Justin Fields getting set free?
No, other than I think we got to get a Justin Fields jersey, because I think we've pretty much declared Justin Fields our favorite player heading into 2025. I don't know if we've had a week where we haven't mentioned Fields and his value.
Nor should we have. Yeah.
On this show, quite frankly. And no, to your point, no, yes, you question him sometimes as a passer. I get it. Yes, sometimes it's a little spiky, right, with Justin Fields. Like, he doesn't have the consistency maybe as some of those other top-notch guys week to week. But at the end of the day, he's always a top 10 quarterback that you're drafting in the double-digit rounds. Like, if you have the strategy that you're going to wait on quarterback, well, the strategy is Fields better be one of those 2 quarterbacks you're drafting because you're waiting at the position. I mean, it's just that simple. We talk all the time about the cheat code. What are the guys that can get you those value later on? And, last year was Jaden Daniels, right, in the 9th round. Well, Justin Fields is going farther than that. I mean, we're talking about a guy going 12th, 13th round, borderline even being drafted. Is he going to put up Jaden Daniels' passing numbers? No, probably not. But he was still serviceable enough when he had DJ Moore, when he had a number 1 option and he has that now in Garrett Wilson, who he was already teammates with, he already has chemistry with, already has rapport with. No, I'm with you. Justin Fields is going to wind up, I think we all, and this is what drives me crazy about it, I think we all know Justin Fields is going to wind up a top 12 quarterback, but nobody seems to be willing to actually predict and rank him as a top 12 quarterback when it's all said.
It's the Jets factor. Everybody's scared off because he's now, in New York playing for the Jets, which has been a historically inept franchise lately. But I agree with you completely. I think it's ridiculous that nobody's willing to take that step. We've embraced him on our show, but I think that I agree with you that a lot of people are discounting him, and I think a lot of it is because of that New York Jet factor. They're looking at the jersey. They're not looking at what the dude's been able to do, even playing for a terrible Chicago team, even having a terrible situation for himself in Pittsburgh last season. Adam, any thoughts there on our guy Justin Fields?
I will always love Justin Fields, and I will continue to be on the Justin Fields bandwagon with you guys. We've been united pretty much all day, but I don't know if we're going to be any more united than with this one.
Yeah, I don't know how anybody can look at it. And if you, especially in like a best ball format, if you haven't done your best ball drafts yet, if you want to wait, load up your other positions, wait on that quarterback, you can get him later than you can get some of the other superstar running quarterbacks. And not much, not a ton later, but you can get him a little bit later than some of those other superstar running quarterbacks. Load up on your other positions, give yourself more, shots in the barrel.
He's a cheap stack. Garrett Wilson's going in the 3rd round.
Exactly. Nobody wants Garrett Wilson either. Yeah, everybody's down on Garrett Wilson this year. Everybody's down on him. Nobody wants parts of he wasn't all that good with him. Listen, Garrett Wilson is still Garrett Wilson. He's still this player that we all thought he was coming into this league. He has played with some very inept quarterback play, and then last season he kind of got usurped when they brought in Aaron Rodgers' boy, Davante Adams, and or otherwise Garrett Wilson could have shot to the moon. I will maintain that. So I love the situation there. I think we all like him anyway. Again, we're always looking for that rushing upside at quarterback in not just dynasty, in any fantasy situation. And who has more rushing upside than Justin Fields? There's few and far between in the NFL right now. If we can get a full 16 games out of him, I think you're going to like where you're able to draft him, the capital you have to spend on him. If you want to wait on your quarterback till late rounds, again, load up everywhere else, not just in best ball, redraft as well. I think you're going to find yourself very happy at the end of the season.
No,
Dan,
I do think you need to take 2 quarterbacks with him because you kind of just mentioned it there. He has not been able to get through an entire season as a starter without missing a few games here or there. So I do think you're going to have to be aware of that. But I mean, I don't care about the cost as far as where you're drafting as far as that's concerned. But that is the strategy behind that. We do have like a couple of minutes. I don't want to go too long on this, but I would feel weird on this show when we're declaring independence from players to not mention Kyle Pitts, at least briefly. So, I mean, Chase, go ahead, lead the way on that one.
Well, no, I was just going to say, I mean, yeah, it's kind of, funny that none of us mentioned the guy that everyone is ready to move
away from the obvious. I think that's what we all tried to get away from the obvious and not mention it.
Right. But is there anyone that we are more happy to see maybe fade off into the distance or at least leave in the distance than Kyle Pitts, a guy who came into the league with so much hype, regardless of the fact that he was a wide receiver playing tight end and it's going to be so awesome. And he can do things that no one else can do. And then he ran into the Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith and how they wanted to use him. And then Arthur Smith, decided that he kind of wanted to use him, but then didn't. And it's just been such a terrible situation for him. Now, granted, I think he can do well with better quarterback play, but I'm just not convinced that he is an answer fantasy wise, at least, a consistent fantasy answer, in this league. I don't see it. Now, best ball, I'm still probably tempted to take a shot on him just because he is still a great athlete and occasionally he can do some things. But no, I think that Kyle Pitts is somebody that the industry is ready to be out on. I think that our listeners are ready to be out on. I know damn well that I am ready to be out on him. What's your thoughts, gentlemen?
Well, Adam, let me ask you this question, because there are people out there, kind of like we talked about with the Michael Penix situation, opening up the offense for Bijan Robinson, that are trying to make the argument that with Michael Penix in there, maybe it'll be a different scenario. I don't know where they're getting that from, because he had one game where he had 44 yards and a touchdown with Penix. In the other 2 games, he had 2 targets and 3 targets and did nothing like he usually does. But what's your idea about that, being you had that perspective of the offense?
I don't think that Penix unlocks anything for him. I think, if anything, I mean, at tight end 15, he's someone who I think is still rosterable because he is a great athlete, because he's of his size, and because we've seen athletic tight ends like him break out way late in their careers, like a bunch of times. And that's just kind of the one thing that I hold on to. He's someone who is like the star that we're talking about as like a conversation piece every offseason. That's dead to me. I don't think I really want to talk about Kyle Pitts anymore. Like, I'm good. We don't need to keep doing but this is the season Kyle Pitts is going to be good. Like, we're done with that. But I'm not declaring independence from him to the point that I'm no longer rostering him, or to the point that I think his career's done. I think there's still a shot for him to be something down the line, to have a Jared Cook-esque like late career surge. But I don't think that we're talking about, what we thought we were going to get when he came out of college.
We thought he was going to be a 9. We thought he was going to be a 9 target a week type tight end. We thought he was going to have, his
that version of him is dead.
Yeah, no, and we've really never seen it outside of a couple of flash games. His Tampa Bay game, second Tampa Bay game last season, but even then he only had four catches on 5 targets. He scored 2 touchdowns. I mean, we've never gotten the Kyle Pitts we all thought we should get from Kyle Pitts, and I don't know that we're ever going to, other than flashes.
No, probably not. But with that, that's going to do it for today's show. Great job, gentlemen. Make sure you check us back again next week with another edition of Operation Domination. We're inching ever so closer to training camp. I cannot wait. Make sure you download on your favorite podcast app and check out Operation Domination on our YouTube channel on the Fantasy Sports Advice Network at FF Advice Net. We'll see you guys soon.